In 1980, China had a lower GDP per capita than Kenya, lower than Haiti. Most of its population lived in the countryside, without access to electricity, without basic sanitation, without prospects. It was a country that had gone through decades of famine, civil war, cultural revolution, and total isolation from the modern world. 40 years later, China is the second largest economy on the planet. It has the largest army by personnel, the world's largest navy in terms of ships built. It controls the global supply chain of semiconductors, batteries, solar panels, and rare earths. It is a creditor to dozens of countries. It launches space missions, and it has surveillance technology that the United States studies with envy. How the hell does that happen? It's not a miracle. It's not just hard work. It's not simply communism that worked, nor capitalism disguised as communism. It's something far more interesting and far more calculated than any of those simplistic narratives floating around. Today, we're going to understand the greatest economic leap in recent human history from the real beginning. Stay with me.
To understand what China did, you first need to understand the hole it was in. Mao Zedong died in 1976, leaving behind a complicated legacy. He unified the country, expelled colonizers, and built a functional nation-state where there had once been chaos. But he also killed, depending on the historical source, between 15 and 55 million people, most of them from famine during the Great Leap Forward, an agricultural collectivization policy so badly executed that it destroyed food production instead of increasing it. Then came the Cultural Revolution, which lasted a decade and essentially consisted of destroying whatever technical and institutional intelligence remained in the country. Professors, doctors, engineers, economists, all were sent to the countryside to re-educate their bourgeois errors. Universities closed, books burned, anyone with technical knowledge was suspect. When Mao died, China had a communist party that controlled everything but barely knew how to make anything function economically. Then Deng Xiaoping changed the game, and he changed it because he was pragmatic in a way few political leaders ever managed to be. There's a phrase attributed to him that sums it up. It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. In other words, ideology would take a back seat. What mattered was whether it worked. But what exactly did he decide to do? He did not privatize China. He did not turn capitalist. He did not read Adam Smith and have a free market epiphany. What he did was far more surgical and far more authoritarian than that.
Deng's first reform was in the countryside, and this is where most superficial analyses skip straight to the factories and misdiagnose the story. Mao's commune system was a disaster because it removed any individual incentive from farmers. If you work in a commune where everything you produce goes to the collective and you receive a fixed quota, what's the incentive to work harder? None. The result was minimal output, maximum waste, and endemic hunger. Deng did not privatize the land. The land remained state-owned, but he allowed farming families to lease plots and sell surplus production. You deliver the quota to the state, whatever remains is yours to sell on the market. The result was immediate. Agricultural production exploded. Tens of millions of people left extreme poverty in the 1980s without a single private corporation being created. That freed up labor, rural labor that no longer needed to remain tied to food production. Where did that labor go? To the special economic zones. And here is the central mechanism of everything. In 1980, China created 4 zones, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen, where the rules were completely different from the rest of the country. In these zones, foreign companies could invest, hire workers, export products, and repatriate profits. Low taxes, flexible regulation, infrastructure built by the state, cheap and disciplined labor. It was a calculated bet. The logic was simple. Let foreign capital come in here. It brings technology, know-how, and access to international markets. We offer labor, political stability, and protection of property within these zones. Everyone wins. The West looked at this and thought, great, cheap labor, let's build factories. And they did, in massive numbers. What the West did not fully calculate, or calculated and believed it could control, was that China was using this foreign investment strategically. It wasn't just about assembling products, it was about learning, absorbing technology, creating local suppliers, building domestic industrial capacity while letting foreigners pay the bill. China never truly played the free market game. It played selective free trade with a strong state, long-term planning, and strategic protection of sectors considered critical, and it did so with a patience most democratic governments are structurally incapable of having. Democracies operate in 4-year cycles. The Chinese Communist Party operates in 40-year cycles. When a multinational wanted to enter the Chinese market, the government imposed a condition. You don't enter alone. You enter with a Chinese partner. That partner will sit in your offices, see how you operate, understand your processes, train engineers on your machinery, and eventually compete with you, or be absorbed by a state-backed firm. This was compulsory technology transfer. Americans complained, Europeans complained, the WTO opened cases. China paid fines, adjusted regulatory language without changing practice, and continued. Because the Chinese market was too big for multinationals to refuse, 1.3 billion potential consumers, a middle class growing every year, rapid urbanization, whoever left would lose ground to whoever stayed. Volkswagen stayed, GM stayed, Boeing stayed, Siemens stayed. All formed joint ventures, all transferred technology. Some regretted it later, but at the time, shareholders were happy with quarterly results, and that is what mattered. But copying was never the final objective, it was just the beginning. Chinese industrial strategists systematically used a concept called learning by absorption. Bring in foreign technology, dismantle it, understand it, train engineers to replicate it, then improve it. The railway sector is the most impressive example. In 2004, China had zero high-speed rail technology. The government launched massive international tenders and invited Siemens, Alstom, and Kawasaki to sell technology and build lines. The conditions were explicit: transfer technical knowledge, train Chinese engineers, and produce locally through Chinese firms. The European and Japanese companies accepted because the contracts were enormous and they assumed the technology was too complex to replicate quickly. They miscalculated. In less than a decade, China not only absorbed the technology, but created its own variations, patented improved components, and began exporting high-speed trains to other countries. CRRC became the largest train manufacturer in the world. It was a slow-motion takeover, and everyone watched it happen. The same pattern repeated in solar panels. In the early 2000s, solar technology was dominated by German, American, and Japanese firms. Today, more than 80% of the world's solar panels are manufactured in China or with Chinese components. The planet is becoming greener with Chinese technology, a geopolitical irony. But for this model to scale, China needed something that cannot be bought internationally: engineers. Lots of engineers. Good engineers. China graduated more engineers in the last 20 years than any country in history. In 2020, Chinese universities graduated around 1.2 million engineers. The United States graduated roughly 180,000 that same year. The scale difference is enormous. The Chinese government aggressively directed resources and incentives towards science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. While Western education debates revolved around culture wars, China built laboratories and funded research. There was also the returnee phenomenon. In the 1980s and 1990s, China sent tens of thousands of students to top Western universities: MIT, Stanford, Caltech, Harvard, Cambridge. Many stayed, but a significant portion returned, not just with degrees, but networks and insider knowledge of how Western tech companies functioned. In 2008, China launched the 1,000 Talents program to attract them back with competitive salaries, equipped labs, housing, and status. The FBI opened investigations over suspicions of industrial espionage, but the central point is that it worked. The one-way brain drain became partially reversed. In 2015, China released Made in China 2025, an explicit industrial plan listing 10 strategic sectors where it aimed for global leadership: artificial intelligence, robotics, semiconductors, aerospace, medical devices, electric vehicles, renewable energy, and more.
Washington's think tanks took notice. China was openly declaring it would use the state to dominate the industries defining 21st century power, and it had the money, engineers, industrial capacity, and political consistency to attempt it. The American response was a trade war. Tariffs, export restrictions on chips, blacklists of companies. Huawei became the most visible symbol of this confrontation. The interesting part is that the blockade revealed mutual dependence. China still relies on chips manufactured by Taiwan's TSMC and on Dutch ASML lithography equipment for the most advanced semiconductors. That is the real vulnerability of the Chinese model today, its Achilles heel. China knows this, and it's investing tens of billions of dollars to close that gap. Whether it will succeed and how long it will take is one of the most important strategic questions in the world right now. It's a technological race with the geopolitical weight of a war without bullets, for now.
The model that worked for 40 years is reaching tension. China has become too expensive to remain the center of low-cost manufacturing. Wages have risen. Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, and Mexico now compete for that role. China has tried to move up the value chain, succeeding in sectors like electric vehicles, solar energy, and telecommunications, but faces growing resistance in Western markets. The United States has shifted posture. The trade war under Trump was visible, but bipartisan containment continued under Biden and persists again. High-performance chips are blocked, sensitive tech investments are restricted, supply chains are being reshored. China faces internal pressures. The export and infrastructure-driven growth model created a massive real estate bubble. Local government debt is chronic. The population is aging rapidly due to decades of the one-child policy. And there is a question few analysts answer honestly. What happens when a country that grew at 9, 10, 11% per year slows to 4 or 5? An entire generation grew up expecting each year to be better than the last. If that stops, the implicit social contract between the party and the population must be renegotiated. Xi Jinping is betting on nationalism, technological self-sufficiency, and external power projection. Whether that works remains unwritten. What is written is what has already happened. A country that accounted for less than 3% of global GDP in 1980 reached 18% by 2023, without war, without colonies. It was state planning, disciplined labor, forced technology transfer, controlled exchange rates, a billion-person market as leverage, and 4 decades of strategic consistency in one direction. It is one of the most important geopolitical events of the last century. The question that remains is this: has the West learned anything from it? And what can developing countries extract from this story and replicate in their own economies? Tell me in the comments what you think. And if this video made you reflect, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks geopolitics is boring. I recently made a video showing how the takeover of Venezuela by Trump goes far beyond oil and has much more to do with preventing China from completing its plan for domination in South America. I'll see you there.